So welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar. This is a joint webinar between Clinical Trials BC and the network of networks. I'm the business development specialist for N2, and today's presenter is going to be Alison Orth, who is the unit director at Clinical Trials BC. And Clinical Trials BC, I guess, was the precedent organization was BC CRIN, or BC Clinical Research Infrastructure Network. So Alison's going to take the time this afternoon to talk to us about results from the Canadian Clinical Research Participation Survey. And this was a survey that was administered in BC between 2013 and 2015, and then more nationally between 2016 and 2017. So Alison's going to take things away and present. I'm just going to let people know that we will have time for some questions and answers. We're going to put those near the end, but if you'd like, go ahead and type your questions as we go along, and we can see if we can squeeze in some answers at particular sections, or we can also hold out till the end. So Alison, thanks a lot in advance, and I'll hand it over to you to take away.
Thank you, Dawn. I'd just like to start off by thanking N2, in particular Dawn and Barbara and Shelley, for supporting this webinar today and working with me to make it happen. And also I'd like to give a big thank you to Barbara for the slides. She did some amazing work with it on the slides for me, so I really appreciate that. So I'd like to talk to you today. I see a lot of names on the call, and I know that some of you here today helped to recruit and find participants for this survey, and I also really want to thank you, and I'm excited to tell you more about these results today. Just trying to forward the slide, and sometimes it takes a second. Hi, Barbara, it doesn't seem to be going. Okay. So what we want to talk about today is learn a little bit about the survey and the background and what we collected, and also look at the results that we found, and talk about some of the steps that we took within BC, and some ideas for what potentially you may want to do within your institutions with some of these findings, and how we might be able to help you do that. Just some disclosures that at the time of the survey, I was a contractor with BC CRIN and did receive payment for the work associated with conducting the survey. I'm also currently employed by Fraser Health for activities unrelated to this survey. So I wanted to start off and just take a little step back to talk about, so part of the reason for this survey, as you're aware, was looking at how can we tackle some of the issues in declining enrollment rates. So I wanted to take a step back and just look at some other work that we did recently, and was recently published in October 2018. And that was a survey, a joint survey between Clinical Trials Ontario and BC CRIN, or now Clinical Trials BC, around public opinion of clinical trials. And that is sort of a complement to this work in the sense of the general public, what is their awareness, their knowledge, their perceptions and opinions about clinical trials, and how willing, even though they may not have ever been asked, but if they were, how willing would they be to participate? So we did find that overall clinical trials are regarded positively, and the overall perception was that they do provide societal and personal benefits as well. So important to note the societal benefits, because that will show up in our research participant, their reasons for participating. Most respondents said they were somewhat, 49%, or very willing, which is 19%. That's pretty high, 19%. When we look at, we know some of the standard enrollment rates are much lower than that, or the participation rates. A significant minority feels poorly or not at all informed about clinical trials and what they are and how to get information about them. So I think that's something, and I know that N2 has a committee, the Clinical Trials Education and Awareness Committee, and that's something that they are looking at trying to move the dial upon, is that public education on clinical trials. So if that's of interest to you, reach out to N2. And I know they're always looking for volunteers for a committee. So, and finally, I'd just like to mention that often they talk about where do patients of the public look for their information about trials, and how do they want to be informed about trials. And it was pretty clear that they often look to their initial treating physician, whether it's the GP or specialist, for that information, and least often to social media if they're just sort of newly diagnosed or have a condition and looking for potential trials. So I think that's important to consider. I know there's a link to the paper, and it goes into a little more detail about that, and the challenges, of course, with having physicians being able to provide that information. So going back to why did we do this survey in the first place? Well, around in 2012, BC Crim held a symposium, and we had Ken Getz from Syscript, who does a lot of work around this as well, and they have similar surveys, and I'd encourage you to have a look at their results. But from that presentation, it was noted that 11% of sites in North America do not enroll any subjects, and 52% do not hit their target or under-enroll. And around 2011, we saw a significant decline in the number of trials that were coming to Canada at that time, partly economic factors and the globalization of trials. So we wanted to look at, okay, if we're having a declining share of trials in Canada, and part of that reason could be if we're not able to meet our enrollment targets, well, that really means less access to Canadians for those trials and those new treatments. So there's also that economic piece to the sites and the researchers if you're unable to meet the targets. Oftentimes you're not able to recoup your costs for running the trial, but also to be able to bring those trials to Canada. And so we wanted to look at, can we examine for Canadians, what are some of those barriers to participation, and what are some of those reasons why they participate? And once they're participating, what is their experience like? Of course, this slide's just talking a little bit to when you have recruitment challenges. Oftentimes the sites will say, well, it was the protocol, the inclusion criteria was not broad enough, exclusion was too strict. And the sponsors may say, well, the site said they could enroll 50, and then in reality, they didn't have that population and they only enrolled 10. There sometimes privacy or other regulations that prevent you being able to reach out to that eligible cohort or patient. Perhaps negative attention in the media about that particular condition or drug or a trial related to that. And sort of the public willingness. And we look back to that and see in Canada, they are actually quite willing. So those are some of the challenges around recruitment, but we wanted to focus on, okay, what do the participants and the patients have to tell us about their reasons why they feel that can be challenging. So the survey objectives were to directly engage Canadians in discussion and feedback on clinical trial participation. We wanted to obtain current and regional data for Canada and within our provinces. Like I said, there's other surveys that have been done in the US and other surveys even within Canada, but in particular therapeutic areas, primarily oncology, some in pediatrics. So we wanted to include all of those areas and obtain some Canadian data. And the goal of this is to try to use some of this information to improve our participation rates, to promote awareness of the contribution that clinical trial participants make, and to improve their experience in the hopes that that will create more of a positive culture around trials, They may be able to refer family members or friends, or potentially participate in another trial in future. Very quickly, how the survey came to be, Dawn alluded to that. And actually, I want to thank the Vancouver Island group consortium that in 2010 had the idea to do this as a bit of just a little pulse check. And they collected 100 responses from 13 independent sites across the province, or across Vancouver Island, and I believe through their health authority as well. And that led to the expansion across BC in 2012 with 72 active enrolling sites, 596 responses, and we added the online option for the survey. And in 2016, we initiated, but the bulk of the recruitment was in 2017 across Canada. And that brought us up to over 100 sites across the country. We reached our target of 1,000 responses. We thank N2 and the Canadian Clinical Trials Coordinating Centre for helping to promote the survey and look for interested sites and institutions to help us refer. Now, for that survey, it was only online. We had a large social media promotion, but also with patient groups. And that was something we really looked to. It was a lot of online, but also through patient advocacy groups that assisted with spreading the word and the link for the survey. So we did have that web-based and paper surveys at one point. For the actual recruitment, there were multiple ways. In BC, primarily it was that we had these little cards with the electronic survey URL on it, or the actual paper survey was given to those coming in at the research sites, either during screening, particularly for those that declined or failed screening, during the study if they were on a study, or at their last visit. When we went nationally, it was primarily the e-newsletters, websites, social media, and posters, although some people, I believe, were handing out the cards at their clinics. We had a large number of questions on this survey. It was very detailed and comprehensive because we wanted to collect adult and pediatric populations, but also the experience of screen failure, if they withdrew themselves from the trial, if the study was canceled or the investigator decided to withdraw. So there were a lot of subgroups, and that made it a little more tricky in terms of if there was the paper survey, there's a lot of skip areas. And so, but we were able to capture a variety of types of research participants. So we had, like I said, different sets of questions, depending if they declined, enrolled, withdrew, and we used the 5-part Likert scale of how strongly did they agree or disagree with each of the questions presented to them, or perhaps it was not applicable. And at the end of each section, and particularly at the end, we had a comment section that was open to free comments, and we did find some very rich and insightful information there, and in particular, one finding that we hadn't asked about. That is one of our first areas that we're tackling to try to improve. So just a little bit about the demographics of who completed the survey. Within those, there were 79% had actually completed and gone through a clinical trial. 11% of the 1,000 had declined, and 9% had some form of early termination, and 2% of the total 1,000, which is an N of 20. Small number, but we had a little bit of information from that group. And I think, again, to note, a harder group to be able to capture that at the point of screen failure. Within that early termination group, we did break it down, and we had a little bit within that 89, but those percentages are, of course, of the 1,000. We had those where the study had been canceled by the sponsor, the study physician had withdrew them, or they had withdrawn themselves. The types of therapeutic areas, I think we did an amazing job here. We were able to capture such a wide range, oncology being the most significant, followed by preventative therapeutics or immunization, immunology or rheumatology, cardiovascular, and then we just go sort of down the line. But we have multiple different areas, all the way down to pain management, ophthalmology, dermatology. So I think that was great. And there is a little slide here just to compare. Overall, this was something that is on the CCTCC website, and they looked at breakdown of active trials by therapeutic area. And you can see that our results are fairly reflective here in terms of cancer. Infectious disease was higher for us, but it just depends on the types of groups. And of course, they have a 30% other, but we have that more broken down. So just as a comparison. And we can see across Canada where our respondents came from by province. And we did have a French version for the online survey. And so within Quebec, we had 73 respondents, and 64 of those chose to complete the English survey, and 9 of those chose to complete in French. But we are very thankful that we were able to have that with the support of CCTCC for translation. If we look at the top right, we can see a breakdown of the 1,000. So we had the majority were female, we had 34% male, and 6% of those being parents. When did the study take place? Most of them were currently on a trial, that's 39%. But we had a good variety on the others, right out from 1 year out to more than 5 years. 200 people had said that they were participating greater than 5 years ago. So I think that's a good representation. I just want to look a little bit at the consenting. So we had those groups where they consented and agreed to participate, and those who declined. So I just wanted to look at the differences by demographic in those that went into the consenting group versus declining group, and were there any? So what we're going to cover today, I mean, this actual presentation can have given this as a 3-hour session with breakouts. So what we're focusing on today are just some of those that the statisticians found to be clinically significant in the findings when you looked at correlations between demographics or various variables. Those are the ones that we're going to talk about today. So in our consenting versus declining group, one thing that was quite interesting, and this has been spoken of before, was that the higher the level of education, the more likely someone was to decline participation. And when you get to the postgraduate degree, you can see it's quite significant, 9% versus 16%. Also similar with household income. So the higher the household income, the more likely they were to decline participation. Again, there's multiple reasons why this could be. There certainly was a significant trend. One of them could be that those in the higher income households potentially have 2 full-time working parents and have less time to either participate themselves or with their children. And they're in that working age group where potentially the lower income households are maybe retired, and so they have time to participate. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But we don't know what those particular reasons are. We just know that it's something to be aware of. When you look at that, actually the less than the 15, just going back very quickly, in that lowest group, again, 7% versus 4% was a little bit wider range there. When you look at whether they what type of treatment or product they received, it was just interesting to see, was there going to be a huge difference if it was a natural health product, if it was surgical, a drug or device? And there wasn't a huge difference between that, whether they consented or declined, depending on the type of therapy. So we're going into reasons for declining to participate. So in our adult group, we had 98 respondents that declined to participate in a clinical trial. And these are the top 5. There were 23 statements that they could say whether they agreed or disagreed with. And we took the agree statements and strongly agree that those were their reasons for declining, combined those, and these are the top 5. So 55% of those 98 decliners said that part of the reason was they did not have time due to work or other commitments. 37% said the trial was too burdensome or demanding. And as we looked into the comments, that had to do with number of visits, how long the visits were, what would be being asked of them in terms of procedures. 32% said they did not feel their health would directly benefit. And 31% said, well, if the trial was outside of working hours, again, going back to that 55%, and it confirms each statement that they certainly would if it was weekends or evenings or outside of their hours of work. And 29% did indicate they wanted to be paid more for their time and their expenses. And that came up a lot later on during the comments. In fact, all of these came up very strongly in our comments. And so, and here are the reasons, with the lowest. So I thought it would be interesting to see which reasons didn't have as much impact on their reason for declining. And so we have 8% were going on vacation, traveling, and that's often common. They're not going to be there during the time of the study. 6% had a previous bad experience in a clinical trial. And so that's something, again, where we're looking at that participation experience and what can we do to make sure that that doesn't happen, or they know somebody had a bad experience in a clinical trial. 4%, we had asked this question. Some people were saying, well, they didn't want their general practitioner, their family physician, to know they were going to participate on a trial, and maybe some people don't want to agree to that sharing with their GP, but only 4% said that might have been a concern for them. And 1% said they did not understand English well. Now, keeping in mind that we only had this survey in English or French, and so if English was, or there was a language barrier reason to declining, more than likely we had an issue potentially with them completing the survey as well. So that would not really be reflective of our general population. We look at the most extreme responses where it was really significant. And this was something that Monica, who was a statistician from Chaos, said, you know, I'm just seeing this so strongly. I want to let you know that 19% of those decline really responded very strongly to it being a combination between time constraints and their health would not have benefited. So the fact of what they would have had to put into and take time off work and make those extra accommodations, they didn't feel that the trial would benefit them enough for them to have to do that. So keeping in mind, if your trial doesn't have, if it has maybe a placebo group, if it's preventative in nature, if it's with healthy participants, this is going to be a really big issue versus those where it's like a very intensive treatment trial and there's minimal options and the trial is offering something that they feel really, really could have an impact on their care and their disease. So in those cases, they would be more willing to make the accommodations, and potentially they aren't able to work at that time, so it is easier to participate. Some of the comments, going back to those times of the clinic study times, during the regular weekday 8 to 4 are hard to attend, evenings and weekends are better. The lab was an issue. Lab availability is limited to Monday to Thursday. I work on those days. Studies should consider offering extended lab hours and maybe fast-tracking participants if they're having to wait for too long sometimes. We've heard where they may have to wait an hour or two just to get their lab drawn. And so if they're volunteering their time and they're at the study location for extended periods of time and don't feel that time's being productive, that can be quite a concern for them. Versus with routine care, sometimes I know it's still an issue, but sometimes they just feel that because they're volunteering their time, that there should be potentially more accommodations for that. Before I go into the reasons for why the clinical trials, the reasons for consenting, I do just want to let you know that we have a more in-depth discussion around each of these reasons for declining and consenting that we can do in more of a workshop format, and we do that in breakout sessions. So if that's something that anybody on the call is interested in doing or having at their site or doing a workshop locally, then please do reach out to me after this, because there's so much more information and different workshops and breakout sessions you can do with your researchers and your coordinators or recruitment teams, small groups, large groups. And we actually did it also with patients and the public, and that went really well. And part of it was to brainstorm some things that would work at those sites to improve on these areas. This was one of our participants' comments. They said that they felt clinical trials were important in making future healthcare more effective. Clinical trials are a way to contribute to the future health of my own family and society, which benefits everybody, again, the society. Without clinical trials having been done in the past, I would not be benefiting from medical knowledge gained from them today. Again, so we combined the agree and strongly agree responses, and this was for, just an error in the slide at the top, it's adult consenters, 847. These were the top 7 of the possible 12 reasons. Now, you see, if we go to the first one, 93% consent form clearly and easily understood, that didn't necessarily mean that's why they participated. There was just a statement from their part. But we did hear from a good number in the comments that they had a lot of issues with the consent form being too long and burdensome, too much legal language, and they had some issues with that. So although they were able to understand and they felt potentially, I guess, the level of the language and they understood the information, they found it quite burdensome. And there were a lot of comments around that. I think most significant is this 87% benefits others, even if I didn't benefit directly. We heard that in the public opinion survey, but also in those that do participate, they really do it to help others. It's quite significant, and we also saw that with our pediatric group. Parents that enroll their children was actually a little bit higher for altruistic reasons. Absolutely, and to help others. The study medication provided at no cost. I'm not sure what to make of that. Interesting in Canada. Maybe it's something they couldn't routinely get, and that's the way they are responding, or it wouldn't be covered, or of course not yet available because it's through a trial. My family supported my decision. And there we go to no commitments conflicting with study visits. 69%. So they said, well, I could do it. I had time. I was available. That wasn't an issue. And the doctor supported my decision. So they're a GP or family practitioner. So the family and the doctor is quite significant to their decision. I know at our vaccine site where we were enrolling children and adolescents and with the parents, not only did we used to spend a lot of time talking with those parents and the families, but we used to give them information and ask them if we could send information to their GP about the trial and encourage them to go to talk to their GP before they made their decision. And that used to really, really help. Once they had that sort of level of comfort about the trial with their trusted family physician, then they would come back to the research site and we found that had was quite helpful to them. 64%, they were saying the study doctor or a doctor, we're not sure if it's a study doctor or a physician, treating physician or the regular practitioner, wouldn't ask me if the risk was too great. So that's a bit of an ethical flag there, something for discussion for future. Another comment, I believe that clinical trials helps move science and thus medicine forward. I am happy to be part of the development of scientific knowledge for the betterment of society. Again, about the societal benefits and helping and volunteering. I know in the States, the CISCRIP, one of their programs is Medical Heroes. And I mentioned that to a patient partner the other day, and they were just like, wow, that's so great. Like they really connect with that. And they are. This comment, or this finding was interesting because we've seen some extreme responses around participating depending on money, their time availability. That's not the same for everybody. So these are some responses where we had strong responses, but not everybody agreed. In fact, maybe in some cases, just as many people disagreed as agreed. So somebody, did they participate because they were not satisfied with the other treatment options available? Well, 22% said yes, but 35% did not agree with that statement. They participated because the payment would help them financially. 33% said yes, the money that's there is actually going to help them, but 36% said no, that wouldn't, and it didn't impact their decision. I felt they would have better access to healthcare services. 40% agreed, but 26% disagreed. So again, there's certainly areas where you can't assume that that's the same for everybody. Are there any questions on the chat, or would we like to pause for any quick questions at this time before going on to the next section?
Allison, I don't see any questions on the chat, but people can go ahead and type them in if they've got them for Allison. Or you can also raise your hand and I can unmute you so that you can ask your question, whatever works best.
Thanks, Dawn.
I think you're okay to keep going for now, Allison.
Okay, yeah, just let me know if any come up.
Yep.
So, clinical trial participation experience. We often hear about patient experience at the hospitals or through their healthcare journey. So we looked at that during the trial. And oh, I see Marianne's asking about the presentation being available following. Absolutely, it will, and the recording will be available as well. And I'd love to talk to you about if there's any sort of workshop ideas you have, because we can support a little bit to help you with that as well. So we're happy to say, most people that participated said they had a positive experience on the trial. They said the study team was available to answer their questions. 90% of them agreed with that. They felt well cared for by the research staff, excellent, and participation had a positive impact on my health. And we left that statement quite general because there has been research that's shown even just the fact of participating in a trial and having that extra added time with the coordinators, the physicians, the healthcare providers, the researchers, and taking a look at their own health and self-managing it and all of the reporting back in the diaries and the monitoring of their well-being does have an impact on their health for sure. There was one trial we did that was 3 years of follow-up in a more fragile elderly population, and it required calling them every 2 weeks for 3 years, and it was nurses that were calling them, and really you could see that that was something that actually added to their well-being, and they really looked forward and enjoyed those calls and checking in with how they were doing. Some comments from the participants that were impactful as we read through them. The clinical trial saved my life as another condition was discovered upon the administration of an ECG. Participating has increased my concern with dealing with my condition and made me more aware of the factors which determine my control of my diabetic condition. So just the extra education and teaching and time that's spent with them in some ways can help them learn more at their well-being. Another comment was it was well run, there was no waiting time, the nurses were nice and explained step by step. I mean, that's ideal, that's what we want to see, and that's great to hear. A little lag there. we go. But there were negative experiences for sure, and when there is, the impact is high, really, really high. Some of their negative experience were that one or more of the procedures were uncomfortable or unpleasant, 24%. Now, that's going to be expected, but definitely something when you're planning your implementation of the protocol, whether it's in the protocol, whether it's available, or it's something you can do at your site. Are there additional things you can do to make it more comfortable? I'm thinking in the pediatric population with venipuncture, we would always make sure we're going to add extra money to be able to purchase the butterfly kits versus the regular needle, and EMLA patches, and then mail those out to parents to put on before they come into the clinic, things like that. And it definitely depends on your study and the population and knowing what you might be able to do. I mean, we had one of the comments, they were talking about the chairs were so uncomfortable and they had to wait around for 2 hours in these very uncomfortable chairs. I know it's not a procedure, but certainly that's something where you can think about that, because again, it's not something that they're required to do. They're participating and often feel they're doing that to help and in volunteering. So we want to make sure that we can do what we can to make it more comfortable. 18% experienced unpleasant side effects. Again, that's not something, and I mean, that's going to be expected in the trial or with any of the medications, even with licensed medications. More blood samples were required than I originally anticipated, 14%. I mean, that is an issue. It could be that it wasn't adequately explained in the consent, or they hadn't paid a lot of attention to that, or it just felt like a lot, maybe more than was needed. I know sometimes they feel like, well, you're taking my blood like every month or all the time, and I'm having to come all the way into to the city, an hour drive, just for a blood sample and some questions. And they feel like, well, maybe that's something that could be done locally at their local lab and questions over the phone. These are the things that come up in some of the workshops are there times where you can do that, the virtual visits or visits more locally to them. But it could point to something with the consent form there too. As the next one, the study requirements were more than I originally anticipated. Again, they should have known if they were fully informed, or did they just kind of hear because they want to do the trial, and then as they get into it, it certainly feels like more of a burden as they go along. The research staff were not as professional, I just can't see the bottom there, as I expected, 9%. And if you look back in the slide before, 90% said they were very happy with the research staff. So we have confirmation about 10% of the time. That's pretty high, actually. When we know our peers and our colleagues, and we know what great work we do, and everybody, you know, is just, we have resources like N2 and all of our training for clinical research professionals. So I think we can see, though, there's certainly more work we can do in that professional development area. And if you do have colleagues that you see are struggling with that, certainly perhaps you can help them develop some of those areas. Some of the comments were, I was insufficiently warned about side effects, overly pressured to participate. Okay, we don't want to hear that, most certainly. Another one, I am becoming disenchanted with the trial because I am just a guinea pig, the dreaded word guinea pig, and I am really not involved in the trial as I had originally expected. Again, the expectations. So what's happening there between when they're being enrolled and versus what's happening in reality. And the next one alludes to that too. There needs to be far more detail on all the extra stuff that needs to be done for trials. Blood work, CT scans. There was no information on what the procedure would be or how much time it would really take. That speaks to informed consent to me, or ongoing consent. Again, the biggest thing during the experience, as well as declining, but during the trial, was these burdensome study requirements. It affects those that declined to participate, those who withdrew early. We'll see that after, 21%. And this group in the middle where people agreed to study the experience, it was too burdensome or demanding. So that's something I think we can look at, and we can work with patient partners to try and work with those that are, whether it's the sponsor, investigator initiated, can we look at those areas and what really does need to be done, and there are other ways that it could be done that are more convenient for the participant, but still obtain the quality data you need. And again, maybe that's some of this more mobile technology or virtual trials, virtual visits, the ability to go to local labs, ability to have evening clinics. So it's a huge issue. Next one is around that informed consent. Why are some of the participants' expectations of the study different than their actual experience? Like we said, those that withdrew from the study, they had indicated not anticipated the amount of time, procedures, or commitment that would be required. So that's affecting our withdrawal rates, and certainly our number of subjects for analysis. And 14%, again, of participants found more was required than they originally anticipated. So that's a big issue there. Somebody's line is off mute. So I want to go. Thanks, Don. I'm unmuted. I want to go next to, I had alluded to earlier that in our comments, and can you hear me, Don?
Yes, I can, Allison. You were cutting in and out for a minute, but you're okay now.
Thank you. I alluded to our comments had some very rich information. And there's something that came up again and again, like a lot, maybe 20% of the comments that we didn't ask about. And that was communication to the participants during and after the trial. In particular, the study results, their results and the results of the overall study. One of the comments, I would have liked to have the study follow up directly about my results and the results of the overall study. Somebody said, I would like to see the results of all trials published in free and open access journals. And CISCRP did some work around this and found most clinical trial participants do want to know what the research community learned, yet most never hear, and it was like less than 5% actually do hear from the sponsor or research site staff after the clinical trial has completed. So as I was doing these workshops, we were asking our researchers, please raise your hand, and please think about this in your own practice. How consistently do you communicate back once the study is over with those participants? Whether it's a thank you letter from the investigator and the study team, addition to a newsletter to follow for progress, lay summaries that are sent to them once the trial is completed, personal results that you're able to share with them. And so there's some work that's being done. CISCRP has a white paper around ways to do this. And we've created a working group. I think Olga's on the webinar today. She's part of that group and helping me lead it actually within BC around how can we improve the communication about study results back to the participants following the trial and even during the trial. In the Tri-Council policy statement, it does say that researchers need to disseminate the results back to the research participants. And that's often asked about in grants, how that's going to be done in dissemination plans and even in RAB submissions. When we talk to the researchers and coordinators, they are really thinking of that as more back to those people that worked on the trial and the research community, and not always really thinking about it as the research participant. And looking for every trial, what is it they're going to want to know and need to know, and have you budgeted for that? And have you asked them and got permission of how they would like to receive that communication? So that's something I would encourage everybody to really take a look at for their local practice. So I'm just going to go quickly through these last couple so we have more time for discussion. We looked at, and we'll be sharing the slides, so this will be in here. They're pretty self-evident around some of the early discontinuation. Screen failures. I think the big one was we heard a number of people were quite disappointed, and we had comments around the process of the screen failure and how that was handled. So they felt that they were ready to volunteer, ready to participate, and then told they weren't eligible. And that communication around that, they actually were one of the least likely groups to say they would participate again in future. which you would think it would be decliners. But screen failures was very high, and we think potentially we have some work we can do in that communication there. And maybe a thank you from the investigator, and making sure you include them in future communications for other studies, databases, that sort of thing. And withdrawals, most people that are working with participants probably know a lot of the reasons. Some of the big ones where they felt their health would improve, of course, study procedures were too uncomfortable. But if you look down, 26% said they did not like working with the study team. And 21% said study visits were too much of a burden. And those are issues we really could look at. Investigator withdrawals. Again, we didn't see a lot in there. We had a small number. We did have some comments. Again, it was around the communication of this process and really making sure that you take the time to chat with them about it. They understand it. They have all the questions, and any follow-up is being done and communication with them appropriately. And that was the same for the study cancellation. And this person said, I felt the cancellation of the study was abrupt and ill-managed. My study doctor and nurse found out with little advance warning. So they probably just got a letter one day from the sponsor, and then communicating to their participants that there wasn't a lot of planning or thought into this, it sounds like. Although the study doctor or nurse, one of them, called the participants personally and tell them what they knew, they felt it was really harsh and very sudden. And so there was something going on there. 14% said they were not happy about the way they were told about the study being canceled. So that's important. These next few slides are something that are really good to do the breakouts or the workshops around. And it's mostly looking at, in summary, that this issue around time due to work or other commitments decreases with age. It's really for that working or your school age or working age demographic that it's an issue. And so sometimes we study with over 65 or over 50 population in the particular phase, and they have no problem with enrollment. And now they go to the next phase, and all of a sudden it's open for 18 to 50, and it's a problem. And that could be one of the reasons why is certainly you need to accommodate for that, whether it's compensation for their time to take off work or school, or having evening or weekend hours in that age group. The same, you can see by age, 47, 44% would participate outside working hours, not such an issue over 65. No other commitments. So again, the older, less commitments, and therefore they could consent. Compensation, again, very important to the school age and working age families, and probably because they're going to have to take time off work. I would have participated if I was paid more. Well, over 65, that wasn't really anything they agreed with, but the working age, they certainly do. So it's not just expenses, perhaps, it's that it's costing them to participate. We need to look at that. Payment offered would help me financially. Costs to participate are not just limited to expenses. So people are saying that they shouldn't have to be out of pocket in order to participate in studies that are a benefit for society as a whole. One very interesting thing to note, although we did look at results Eastern versus Western Canada, there were really the only difference that we found that was significant was in the payment. 52% in Eastern Canada agreed the payment that was offered would help me financially. 22% agreed in Western. And some people have said, well, Western Canada, there doesn't tend to be a lot of payment in trials, so that a lot of people feel that it wouldn't be approved by their ethics boards. So it'd be something interesting for someone to take a look at this, especially the ethics folks, as what are the standard pay expenses and other compensation across Canada for trials? Or is it those in the East? I mean, that they were saying they needed it. Somehow I don't think it's that. Maybe there just was more available. So overall, most people would consider participating in another clinical trial. And look at your decliners, 74%. So please don't discount them if they decline for one trial. They certainly need to participate in another. This is just a little summary of something you can do, excuse me, at your sites when you're trying to think through. Every study is different, every cohort, all those subjects, and this is going back to your patient partners. Really encourage having a team within your site, or if you're investigator initiated, developing that protocol, having patient partners or people representative of your study population or therapeutic area on your research team so you can look at these things. And if you can't do that, maybe canvas some potential people in that cohort. Or yourselves, you've worked with the study population. What will they need? What do we need to do depending on their education level, income level? Will they need after-hours clinics? Will they need some transportation, childcare? You need to really have a think about those things. So again, our goals are to increase enrollment into clinical trials, improve the experience of participants. And how do we do that? So we've been engaging the public, researchers, and industry. We want to talk about some of these findings and how we can translate that into understanding. And what can we do to tackle some of these things and workshop them, have the conversation, and potentially even change some practices. I really want to thank all of the patients, participants who took the time to complete the survey, all of the coordinators, managers, and staff at the sites and those patient groups that helped with the recruitment, many of you on the call today, and all of the other groups that supported the development and conduct of the survey. Thank you very much. And I'll leave it there with the contact information. Please do reach out. And Dawn, maybe we have a little bit of time for some questions.
We do. Thanks a lot, Allison. If there are any questions, we have about 5 minutes left in the presentation. Allison, maybe I could start while people are starting to think of some questions. Would you be able to talk a little bit about how you've taken some of these results and maybe helped some organizations, I'll say, turn them into action, turn them into things that they're doing maybe within their site or their health authority based on what you've heard from participants?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. I think the big one right now is and we're just on that road. We've done some workshops. We did them in one particular at Island Health with all the researchers there, and then a second one with the public and patients. And I don't know of any specific outcomes where they've changed their practice, although I think they're moving the dial on the results piece. But what we have done is formed, like I said, this provincial level working group around the results that we're going to look at coming up with some recommendations for practice changes, and or whether it's templates or support and education we can provide with researchers. We're including members of our ethics boards. We're including knowledge translation people, patient partners. I think we have 13. There's someone from the Ministry of Health on this group. So we look forward to sharing the outcomes from that. I think that's a bit the main thing we're doing there. And each different area is taking away different things, but we look forward to more actionable items as we move forward.
Thanks a lot, Allison. It sounds like you guys are doing some exciting things there. Well, maybe I'll ask another question. This sparked another thought. If people are interested in participating in the working group, is that a possibility for them to join, Allison?
It's just we're about halfway through. It's a small provincial level group, and I think we probably want to keep it at those numbers. But certainly, we'd be happy to communicate findings as we go. And I would expect there'll be additional work that will come out of that in future. We're happy to sort of share how we're doing, how we're setting this up if anybody would like to do it locally. And certainly if there's interest in a national one so that we transition this working group potentially from once we've completed this work, which we're anticipating in October, then it would be great to see something potentially national. to tackle one or two of these issues if there were interested people.
That sounds great, Allison. Thanks.
And also, I think on our Clinical Trials Education and Awareness Committee, we are talking about some of this work there too. So right now we're really focusing on the education and awareness public piece of patients. But I would imagine if there was anything related to N2, we may be able to feed into something there, maybe a subgroup.
Okay, perfect. We have a literally quiet bunch, not just because I muted everyone, but I don't see any hands going up and I don't see any questions. So maybe we'll call that a wrap for the webinar. Oh, I see a question now that just popped up. Do you see that, Allison? Maybe I'll just read it off.
I do see it from Judith, and she was hugely instrumental in our first BC phase in helping with the recruitment. Hi, Judith. Great to see you. So she's saying she thinks that stratifying by the early phase versus late phase of a trial would probably tease out the factors on reimbursement, availability, impact on health. I think you're nearly there, but I would expect if you have phase 2A and below as the first group. So Judith, are you able to talk for a minute or two on that? Would you be willing to, could we unmute you? I think there's some interesting ideas there.
Judith, I'm wondering, I can see that I don't think you phoned in, or I think you've joined by phone. I'm not sure how to unmute you. I'm not sure which one is your line here. I'm going to guess it might be the 9781.
Oh, I am unmuted. Hello.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think you're nearly there. I think a lot of what you're saying, you can see that it's the patients that are getting benefit from their health that are the ones that are more engaged and more available. I think if you actually stratify out, I mean, obviously there's no healthy volunteers here, but there's going to be some patients on almost first in man, certainly in the oncology space, maybe a lot of PK sampling being done in some of the earlier phase studies that are being surveyed here. I think if there's any way you can find out more about the trials they were involved in, I don't know if that was a question on the later questionnaires, then that would probably tease out your information quite well.
That's really great insight, Judith. And we didn't ask that type of information, but there's a lot of work that's going on, and I'm thinking even through our support units to understand some of this a bit more. And I could see that being something as a follow-up study. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody look at that before. So that could be some future research for a group.
Okay, I think with that, we'll wrap things up, being respectful of people's time. Allison's information is on this last slide here. Briefly, just like to thank Allison again for presenting and for all of you for your time today. The recording will be available on the N2 YouTube channel, and I think we'll look to post it somehow on some website also related to Clinical Trials BC. We'll be able to share that information with you in the next few days or so, and we'll start to share that more widely over social media as well. So just to thank everyone for your time, and Allison for the great presentation today, and thanks for joining us, everyone.